Welcome to the ITFreeTraining video on configuring and setting up work folders. This video will perform a quick setup of work folders to demonstrate how it works and what features are available. This setup is recommended for a lab environment. For a production environment, you will need to add a few more steps to configure certificates and publish settings to the user to be used with work folders. I will now change to my Windows Server 2012 R2 computer to have a look at how to configure the server side of work folders. Before I start installing work folders, I will first create a folder to store the data for users using work folders. To do this, I will open Windows Explorer and navigate to the D drive. On the D drive, I will create a folder called Work Folders. This folder will be used to store the data from the users who use work folders. The next step is to install work folders. To do this, I will open Server Manager, and then from the Welcome screen, select the option Add Roles and Features. From the wizard, I will accept the default for the first few screens, as I will be installing the role on the local server. When I get to the Select Server Roles screen, I will navigate down to File and Storage Services, expand it, and then expand File and iSCSI Services, and tick the option Work Folders. When this option is ticked, I will be prompted to add the feature IIS Hostable Web Core. Work Folders uses the HTTP web protocol, however, does not require the IIS role in order to operate. Once I press Add Features, for the rest of the options I can accept the defaults, so I will keep pressing Next until I reach the end of the wizard, and I press Install to start the install. The install takes a minute or two to complete, so I will pause the video and return once it has completed. Now that the install is complete, the next step is to configure it. To do this, I will go back to Server Manager, and on the left-hand side, I will select the option File and Storage Services. Once selected, a new menu will appear in which I will select the option Work Folders. To start using work folders, I need to create what is referred to as a sync share. To do this, I will select Tasks at the top right-hand corner, and then select the option New Sync Share to start the wizard. Once I am past the Welcome screen, on the next screen I need to select an existing share or select a folder to store the work folder files in. Any existing shares on the server will be shown, and these can be selected. However, in this case, I will leave it on the default option of Enter a Local Path and select the Browse button. Next, I will browse to the folder Work Folders that I created earlier and select it. With the local path entered in, I will press the Next button to move on to the next screen of the wizard. On the next screen, I need to decide the structure that the data from the users will be in. The top option, User Alias, uses the username for the folder name. If I show an example for the folder structure, the three folders shown, Administrator, Blogs.j, and Do.j, are all named after the user. This is the same system that is used with user profiles in other systems in Windows. This gives you the most compatibility. However, if you have multiple domains, this can cause naming conflicts. The second option, Alias at Domain, eliminates the chance of conflicts. However, the naming convention is different to other Windows systems. If I show an example of this folder structure, you can see that the folders for administrators and Do.j are followed by @ITFreeTraining, but the user Blogs.j is followed by High Cost Training. This prevents the chance of a conflict if you have multiple domains and you have two users with the same name. For example, you have two users in different domains with the same name, John Doe. The next option down, Sync Only the Following Subfolder, allows the administrator to choose a particular subfolder to sync. If this option is chosen, only this subfolder will be synchronized. If I now move on to the next screen, this screen gives you the option to enter in a name and description. This helps the user determine what the purpose of the work folder may be. In this case, I will accept the defaults and move on. On the next screen, I need to decide which users will be able to use the work folder. In this case, I will press the Add button, and then I will enter in the group domain users. This will allow anyone in the domain users group to access this work folder sync share. Notice at the bottom there is the tick box, Disable Inherited Permissions and Grant Users Exclusive Access to their files. If this option is ticked, the only person that will be able to access the files via the work folder is that user. This includes administrators. If you want additional security, you should leave this option on. If I move on to the next screen, there are two options that can be selected. The top option, Encrypt Work Folders, will encrypt the files on the user's workstation using EFS. This will help protect the files in case the computer or device holding the files is lost. If you do decide to use this option, you should also consider setting up a disaster recovery agent to recover the files if you need to. The next option, Automatically Lock Screen and Require a Password, will lock the device and ask the user for a username and password if it is left unattended. A word of warning with these options. If the device that you're using work folders with does not support these options and they are ticked, work folders will not be available on that device. If I now move on to the next screen, this is the last screen and all I need to do is press Create and the sync share will be created. Once it has been created, I will close the wizard. That's it for the configuration of work folders on the server. The next step is to set up the client. To do this, I will change to my client computer that is running Windows 8.1. As this is just a basic demonstration of work folders, I will perform a quick setup in order to get it up and running. In order to install work folders on a corporate network, there are more steps involved, including setting up certificates and publishing work folders. The setup I am using here will show the features of work folders, however it is not very secure and should only be used in a test network. The first step that I will do is open regedit. Regedit can be used to configure additional options in work folders that cannot be configured in the interface. In this case, I will use regedit to allow unsecured connections. This makes work folders easy to set up, as certificates will no longer be required. It is generally not recommended to do this in a production environment. The only exception to this is if your company has a need to inspect data traveling over the network and thus cannot be encrypted. Usually when this is done, a reverse proxy is used, so at least some of the transmission path is encrypted. To add the required key, I will expand down through HKey Local Machine, Software, Microsoft, and then scroll down to Windows, and then expand Current Version. There may not be a key for work folders created already. To create one, I will right-click on the current version and select New Key and name the key Work Folders with no spaces. This will be used to store the additional settings for work folders that cannot be configured in the interface. To create a new value, I will right-click on the white space and then select the option New DWORD 32-bit value. For the name of the value, I will use Allow Unsecure Connection. I will then open the value and set the value to 1. Once this is done, I can close regedit and then right-click on the Start menu and select the option for Control Panel. From the Search option in Control Panel, I will enter in Work and then select the option Manage Work Folders when the option appears. The next step is to configure a work folder. To do this, I will select the option Set up Work Folders. The next step is to enter in an email address. There is more configuration required in order for work folders to accept email addresses. For this demonstration, I have not performed that configuration and instead just performed a basic install, so we can look at the basic features of work folders. Instead of entering in an email address, I will select the option below this, Enter a work folder URL instead. For the URL, I will enter in the fully qualified domain name of NYDC1 and move on to the next screen. The next screen asks where you want to store work folders. The default option will create a work folders folder in the user's profile. You can change this if you wish or change it later on if required. In this case, I will accept the default and move on. On the next screen, the policies of the work folders need to be accepted. If you recall, when I created the work folder, the two options were Encrypt Work Folders and automatically lock screen, and require a password. The user must accept these policies in order to start using work folders. To do this, I will tick the option and press Set up work folders to continue. This will complete the wizard. Once I press Close, the work folders setup will be complete. Notice that the work folders folder will automatically be opened. In the folder, I will create a folder and a text document. This will allow the basic features of work folders for synchronization to be demonstrated. Once the folder and the text document have been created, you will notice something interesting about them. Notice that for both of them, the file names have turned green. If I now open the properties for the text document and then press the Advanced button, notice that the option Encrypt Contents to Secure Data has been ticked. Essentially, what has happened is that when you configure work folders to encrypt data, it will use EFS to encrypt the data. Windows Explorer shows files and folders that are encrypted with EFS in green. I will now close all these windows and go back to the control panel. Work folders will automatically synchronize with the server. You will notice in the middle of the screen the date and time when the last sync was performed. Below this, notice No File Errors. If there is a synchronize error, it will be listed here. Work folders uses a last write wins for synchronizing. If there is a conflict, the last device to write to the file is considered the most current. The conflicting file will be renamed to have the device name after the file name, allowing the user to access this version if it is the version you wanted. If you want to force a synchronization to happen, you can select the option on the left, Sync Now. This completes the setup for work folders on the client. Before I finish the video, I will change back to my Windows server to have a look at the file structure used by work folders. If I open Windows Explorer, I will next open the folders Work Folders that I created and configured the Work Folder Sync folder to use. You will notice a directory called Administrator. The user that I used in the demonstration was the domain administrator, and thus this is why the folder was created. This folder structure was used because of the user alias settings I chose during the setup wizard. If I had selected user alias at domain, the folder would have at ITFreeTraining on the end. If I open the administrator folder, notice the folder in the document that I created. Also notice that they have not been encrypted. This essentially means that if the user lost access to their files due to not being able to access their decryption key, the decrypted files will still be available here. The user could download the files again and encrypt them again. It is still a good idea to have a disaster recovery agent to prevent any changes that have not been synchronized to the server from being lost when the decryption key is lost. With EFS, without a disaster recovery agent, all it takes is for the user to forget their password and access to these files is lost. That covers it for the basic features and a basic setup for work folders. I hope you've liked this video and found it informative. For more free videos, please see our YouTube channel or website. Until the next video, thanks for watching.